The Swedish government has announced that permanent residency will be granted to all Syrian refugees in the country who have been granted temporary residency. Sweden is the first country in the European Union to provide that offer to refugees from Syria, who now number more than 2 million according to the United Nations. As the situation continues to worsen in Syria, the crisis of the country's refugees has become the international community's most pressing humanitarian issue. The UN has called on member states to provide more aid for Syria and its neighboring countries. Sweden, with a population of only 9 million, is the third largest refugee-receiving country in Europe, accommodating approximately 30,000 per year. However, the cost of so many people is quickly ballooning, leading to doubts if such a liberal refugee scheme is sustainable. Refugee settlement expenses have grown to over $118 million last year, from some $42 million in 2006. The country is also facing growing social pressure, with riots that broke out earlier this year taken as evidence of economic disparity between immigrants and native-born Swedes. Bands of youths, mostly from immigrant backgrounds, set cars ablaze and caused damage to buildings in some of Stockholm's suburbs. At the moment, only some 8,000 Syrians who have temporary residency in Sweden will be affected by the new offer to make their situation permanent, but the generous governmental proposal may prompt more Syrian refugees to try and make their way to the Scandinavian nation.
Now, cherry-picked from overcrowded refugee camps in Lebanon, Germany has received its first Syrian asylum seekers, all 107 of them. Their arrival was green-lighted only after opposition parties called out Chancellor Merkel for not doing enough to help the displaced. And more than 2 million Syrians have so far fled the war-ravaged country. Reporting from Berlin, RT's Peter Oliver.
Just over 100 Syrian refugees have arrived in Germany as part of a new program of resettlement that's expected to see 5,000 people fleeing the ongoing violence in Syria come here to Germany to resettle. Now, this is part of a brand new initiative by the German authorities. These people won't go through the traditional asylum program. They're going to be given work permits and allowed to stay for upwards of 2 years. Then their situation will be reassessed. Now, the group who arrived here in Germany, they comprised mostly of women who were described as vulnerable, young girls, people who had serious medical situations, as well as people who've been described as survivors of torture. Now, this has been welcomed by those that work with refugees here in Germany. However, they're saying it's really less than a drop in the ocean.
This is just a first step, but it's come way too late. And there is much more that needs to be done. It's tragic that we have 2.5 years of war without any answers from Europe to this human catastrophe. Europe tells Lebanon and others to open their borders, but the EU keeps their borders shut.
In the period between January and July of this year, around 21,000 Syrians are believed to have fled the violence in their country and applied for asylum here in the EU. The EU has taken on only around 4% of the huge numbers of refugees who are fleeing violence in that country. The majority of those have come here to Germany or to other countries in the north of Europe like Sweden. However, as we've heard, those who work with the refugees saying there's just not enough being done after these countries helped to continue this conflict by supporting the Syrian rebels with training and advice.
A city on fire. That's become the common scene in Stockholm, where riots have raged for a 5th night in a row. Young people in immigrant suburbs of the city have torched cars, smashed windows, set buildings ablaze. The violence has sparked a debate on Sweden's open immigration policy, which has resulted in a massive influx of asylum seekers who many say, simply put, refuse to integrate. Our correspondent Peter Oliver filed this report.
Nice, neat and normal. Not the type of place you would expect to see this. Welcome to Husby, on the outskirts of Stockholm, and the epicenter of Sweden's issue with race, and it's bubbling over.
In Sweden you get welfare, you get access to the education system up to university level, you get access to public transport, to libraries, to healthcare, to everything, and still they feel that they need to riot, throw stones and Molotov cocktails. It's ridiculous. It's a bad excuse.
The violence in the usually peaceful city has become a political football.
The Swedish Democrats are exploiting these events. They make it all about immigration to suit their needs. They see being anti-immigrant as being pro-Sweden.
For the past week, stone throwing and car burning have become the norm in this part of town, known for its high unemployment, predominantly immigrant population. All sparked after a 69-year-old man was gunned down by police while brandishing a knife. That let loose a barrage of emotions.
It's the state that creates this type of ghettoization. They move everyone from abroad into these parts of town.
When it comes to unemployment, Sweden is below the EU average. However, almost 1/4 of under 25s are out of work, prompting some to say it's time for further action, saying a lack of control by government has led them to this situation.
The police can put these riots down in 5 minutes if the politicians were to allow them.
Although Swedes differ over what caused this week's violence, they are in agreement that it's government policy that must be changed to avoid scenes like this being repeated on the streets of Stockholm. Peter Oliver, RT, Sweden.
And as the riots continue to rip through Stockholm, some claim the violence has clearly been orchestrated for ulterior motives. Now that's the opinion shared by Lars Hedegaard, a Danish journalist working for a Swedish newspaper.
If you look at similar instances in other parts of Europe, you'll see eventually that there is a plan behind this. Some people would like to gain a recognition as stakeholders in society. In other words, there are people who would like to be in a negotiating position vis-à-vis the authorities. And so if they can sort of make things happen and make them go away, this proves they have power in the local community, and they are people that you have to reckon with.
The element behind, of course, much of this, these are immigrants, and of course Sweden's got a reputation for opening its doors to immigrants. Surely that multiculturalism is something that Sweden has been successful at over the past, so why should that be going wrong?
Well, it has not been successful. I mean, you can see that right now. There's been it's been an ideology that's been disseminated by the ruling elites of Sweden that this was a great success and a great experiment, a model for the rest of the world. The fact is that these riots that are now spreading in the country, I don't know if they'll continue for a long time, but they certainly demonstrate that this success was a fiction. It never succeeded.